Alrighty, welcome back everyone to the very best podcast from the very end of the bench. We are recording this on Thursday, October 22nd, and as always, we are calling in Emiliano, bringing you episode number 23 on the Unhinged Podcast Network.
Yep, and you guys heard that right, the Unhinged Podcast Network. We are officially partnered with a sports network, so that's pretty damn cool. Just wanted to say a huge thank you. Shout out to Unhinged Podcast, the network. Follow them on Twitter at Network Unhinged for all kinds of fan-created content. Go on their website, unhingedsn.com, where they stream all of their podcasts 24/7 through internet radio.
Awesome. So, on today's episode, we will be going over the offseason. It is officially the offseason. So, let's jump right in. So, this year's free agency pool is not what it usually is. There's not like those A-rated superstar game-changing free agents in there, right? There's those fringe starters, role players, roster bolstering kind of free agent talent out there. So I'm going to go ahead and give you a list, and you're going to tell me which ones intrigue you the most.
Yep.
So starting off this list, we have Millsap, Harrell, Whiteside, Gasol, Gallinari, Ibaka, Dragic, Marcus Morris, Tristan Thompson, Van Vliet, Joe Harris, KCP, Davis Bertans, Jay Crowder, Rondo, Dwight Howard, and hometown hero, fan favorite, unfortunately, Vlade didn't pick up his option, Harry Giles. So
Yep.
out of that list I gave you, which ones kind of intrigue you the most, and which ones do you think would mean to a potentially contending team?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a weird free agency class, but I almost feel like we've been a little spoiled of like 3 or 4 free agency classes in a row where there's just like, blockbuster free agents. And this is almost just like kind of a normal free agency, and like if we think about it, this is kind of like a sign of the times of their teams really locking up their key players. Like I just feel like it's changed the times is what we're seeing a little bit. But first two guys I want to talk about are Montrezl Harrell and Hassan Whiteside. I feel like Montrezl Harrell can be a really, really big piece for a team, but he's going to be one of those guys to where if you sign him to like a maximum or you sign him to a huge contract, like if he gets a Buddy Hield contract, for example, 4 years, 90 million, I feel like in 2 years, there's a good chance that you're going to start to regret it.
Yeah, or kind of like the Tristan Thompson deal back in Cleveland when LeBron demanded that he got extended. And then like a year or two later, you were like, oh shit, now what?
Yeah, no, exactly. And I mean, Hassan Whiteside is almost, he's almost the reason why I'm hesitant to sign Montrezl Harrell, if I'm being honest. Because Trez shows a bunch of potential. He's still relatively young, I think 25 or 26. And like you see the potential there, but you almost see the potential there for like an early 2000s fringe all-star big man and not a 21st century, 3-point shooting era big man. And, he very well could end up just like Hassan Whiteside, where, I think with the discipline, I think the one thing the Clippers did for Trez was give him that discipline and give him that dog. But I definitely think that he could be a big player, and he potentially could walk away from this free agency class with one of the bigger contracts. I think the second guy who, at the end of the day, it won't make sense if he doesn't walk away with the biggest contract, is Danilo Gallinari. Danilo Gallinari could very well get the max from a team. The maximum that he could be offered, I think, is what he'll end up with, because I think that he kind of showed on the Thunder what sort of scoring abilities that he can offer a team and what sort of length he can offer a team. And I think that the Thunder's success kind of set him up to receive that sort of big contract.
Yeah, but with Gallinari, he tweeted that he's ready to not worry about money at this point in his career. Like he's kind of ring chasing is what he alluded to. So could you see him maybe taking like, obviously not a vet minimum, but somewhere in the kind of range of like 5 to 12 million a year, maybe taking a little less than he could get from other teams to potentially join a roster like the Lakers or the Nets or someone out there that's contending? Like, could you see him doing something like that since he kind of alluded to it?
I mean, I could. I didn't know that, and I don't follow him closely enough to really know if him saying that is more of a ploy to gain more interest or if it's genuine. Um, I just think that it's stupid. I think that he'd be stupid with the success that he's shown over these past couple years to get locked into anything more than a 2-year deal if it's less than $15 million a year. I think, if he's going to sign with someone like the Lakers, for example, 2 years, 24 million, get your money, potentially get your ring, or, and then after that, you've gotten your ring, you've shown consistent success, and then you go for a 5-year max deal, you know? So I definitely could see that. I think that this list is full of players that are ring chasing at this point. Someone, someone that doesn't need to ring chase, but might just follow LeBron to LA is someone like Tristan Thompson, and that's why I want to kind of talk about him a little bit. I think that losing Dwight Howard, seeing the absolute lack of positive influence that JaVale McGee had on the Lakers down the stretch. I think that someone like Tristan Thompson could quietly find himself onto the Lakers squad and provide that rebounding, provide just that defensive big man presence, and honestly just be 5 free fouls to give come finals time. If you're playing against Giannis, Tristan's just almost bad boy Pistons style, like just fouling the heck out of whoever the premier star is on the other team. So I could see Tristan Thompson finding himself onto the Lakers squad, or maybe even the Warriors. With how they've dealt with Willie Cauley Stein, and they flirted with Cousins, of course, and that didn't work out. I could see Tristan Thompson landing on a team like that where you know he's used for exactly what he's good at,
Yeah.
rebounding and just being a defensive presence.
One interesting with Thompson, an interesting thing that is he has kind of a skill set that's hard to come across in the NBA, and that's he's a really talented offensive rebounder,
Yeah,
right? So a lot of big men out there can get the defensive rebounds just because there's usually a couple people running back on defense. But he has this weird ability, him and Kevin Love, ironically, to like position himself in the right spot to get his team second shots, which I think is something really, really important with teams like the Lakers you listed and the Warriors. Just based on the volume of threes that are going up in today's NBA, having a player down there on the block that could potentially get you a second option off of a miss is like super important. And it's something that's hard to come by. So Tristan Thompson is definitely an interesting one for sure.
yeah. Next guy who's also pretty interesting, and I think unfortunately might have injured himself out of his job in a more interesting situation than you might think. So Goran Dragic of the Miami Heat, of course, got injured. Proceeded to not be able to play essentially at all in the finals. He played in Game 5, but just was a shell of himself. But I think that the Heat maybe noticed that there's no need to throw money at Dragic right now. They have the young assets that are coming up. I mean, Tyler Hero could very well turn into a Dragic, like with his scoring capabilities and his offensive mind, in a culture like the Miami Heat have built with Pat Riley and Eric Spoelstra, there's really not a need for the Heat to throw money at Dragic this offseason. So he's kind of now in like no man's land of like, hey, I was a part of this great Miami Heat team that made it all the way to the finals. But then you kind of take a step back and you're like, okay, but could the Heat have done it without him? Not this year, probably not. But next year, I could see them moving on from Dragic for sure.
Yeah, that's a good point. Bringing up Tyler Hero, I feel like he kind of has something that Goran lacks, and that's like almost like the killer mentality. Like
Mm-hmm.
he's not afraid of the moment. He's not afraid of like a big shot as like a rookie. So
Yeah.
like him with like a couple years under his belt, like I don't know, he might be like that piece that the Heat needs moving forward over someone like Goran. So I could see them moving on or trying to give him like 5 to 10 million to keep him around if he'll stay, that is.
Yep. No, absolutely. And someone who I do think that he should go after is someone like Joe Harris, because he's on our list as well, because he's essentially just a 3-point specialist. And we could list other teams that I think a lot of these players could go to, but in just kind of bouncing off of the Dragic thing, it's like I think that one thing that will stay true is that 3-point shooting will be an absolute must come finals time. If you cannot compete with a team against you at 3-point shooting, you're just gonna lose. And I
Yeah.
think that we saw that in the couple of the Lakers Heat games where, I mean, Jimmy Butler scored 42 points, not a single 3-point attempt, and you kind of look back and you're like, when did he score 42 points? Is it really a big contributing factor if you can't hit threes regularly?
Yeah.
And if any team should know how valuable it is to have a knockdown 3-point shooter come finals time, it's the Miami Heat, because Ray Allen hit the most clutch three of all time and essentially won them a championship with LeBron.
Yeah,
So if
man.
any team should remember why it's so important to have that knockdown 3-point shooter, it's the Heat. And I think that it'd be behoove of them to go after Joe Harris.
Yeah. I mean, 3-point shooting got Buddy Hield $90 million.
Yeah.
He made Buddy Hield a rich man off of one skill set. So I wouldn't be surprised if Joe Harris got a fat contract this year, just simply because it's hard to come across volume 3-point shooters where they're putting up like maybe 6 to 7 a game or more, but can still hit over like 42%. So
Yeah.
I'm not saying he's going to get a Buddy Hield contract, especially with the CBA kind of in the looms. We don't know really what's going to be going on with cap space in the upcoming years, but Joe Harris is an intriguing asset on any team in the NBA. So
Yeah.
that's a good one.
Yep. Absolutely. And I think the most intriguing piece on this entire list, because he seems, as soon as we're ready to give up on this guy, he shows us that he's still got something left in the tank, and that's Rondo. I mean, it cannot be understated how impactful Rondo was to the Lakers winning a championship this year. And I know that it's easy to recognize they have LeBron, they have AD, they have Kuzma, you know, but Rondo is just like the glue that a championship team absolutely needs. And it kind of worked out for him that Avery Bradley didn't show up, in my opinion, because obviously I think Avery Bradley would have taken some of those minutes away, and I think that Avery Bradley would have taken some of the focus away from Rondo in terms of his impact on the game. You need that veteran presence. I honestly think that a team like the Bucks would be a great fit for Rondo. Go over there and just kind of teach Giannis, the veteran leadership, teach him how to make it through the playoffs and like what it takes. And I mean, he's another one. Like he's just a dog. Like he's just gonna go. Like he doesn't care if he gets 2 points, 2 assists, and 2 rebounds. If he's making an impact defensively, if he's making the right passes, that might not lead to assists, but might eventually lead to the right bucket. He just doesn't care. Like he at this point in his career, he just wants to win. He wants to make an impact. You know, I could definitely see him landing on another team next year and finding himself in a conference finals or the finals again. And
Yeah,
us looking back and being like, oh man, the common denominator is freaking Rajon Rondo.
yeah, Rondo to me, and here's an analogy. Rondo to me is like that, like girlfriend that you keep breaking up with, but then you always end up back with her for some reason. Like every time I'm like, Rondo's done, like he's washed, like he just shows up in the playoffs on some team and just like does what he has to do and like puts that team over the edge. So
Yep.
Rondo just keeps coming back. Like I never know when he's washed or when he's prime Rondo again. It's hard to say, but he's definitely a dog and he still has it in him, I think, especially coming off of that finals appearance.
Do you think that it's a switch that he turns off and on himself? Or do you honestly just think that, because like we brought it up before, like there's just a gene in some people that like when it's time to show up in clutch time, you just simply show up. Do you
Yeah.
think that it's more so the gene, or do you think that it's honestly just him giving a shit at sometimes and not caring other times?
Well, I mean, he's literally that Rajon Rondo is known as playoff Rondo,
Yeah.
right? He showed up on the Celtics. He showed up on the Pelicans with that Anthony Davis team. And honestly, that year with the Kings, we didn't make the playoffs, but Rondo was a really good asset for that Kings team. And
Yeah.
Cousins was a really big advocate for trying to bring him back.
Yep.
Like, he's a good glue guy, but throughout the regular season, sometimes I feel like he tries to do too much in the offense. But
Yeah.
when the playoffs come, he kind of molds into like what his role is supposed to be and just does it.
Yeah.
And hey, Rondo looks like, at least in the past couple years, he's an improved 3-point shooter. Like that used to be his Achilles heel.
Yeah.
And he had some pretty big shots throughout that NBA bubble. So
Yeah.
see what happens with him next year. I'm definitely super interested to see where he goes. He's like that C-rated guy where like a lot of people probably won't care where he goes, but I know he's important.
Yeah, and I think the same can be said for Jay Crowder, which is the
Yeah.
second to last guy we're going to talk about on this list. And just like, it might not even make Woj news, like where Jay Crowder might sign. unless it's a big deal, unless he's one of the guys on the list who end up with a big contract because of what he did with the Heat. But he's just kind of one of those guys that, like, when you win a championship, you're gonna look back and be like, man, I'm sure glad we got Jay Crowder. Like that was one of the pieces that got us here. He's
Yeah.
not a he's not a superstar. He doesn't. I mean, at least in my opinion, he doesn't excel at any one particular thing. He's kind of like Marcus Morris, honestly, and like why Marcus Morris made this list as like an impact free agent, although we're not
Yeah.
going to talk about him specifically. They're kind of similar in terms of like they're just that guy, like both defensively and offensively. You can kind of you can lean on them when you need them. You can trust that like they're going to follow the player, they're going to follow the plan. And at the end of the day, I think that you can trust Jay Crowder to hit a big time three.
Yeah.
He's not.
Him and Covington are like very
Mhm.
much the same too. Like both really reliable 3-and-D players that just do kind of whatever you need them to do in the offense. Like they just mold to that role. And a funny thing to think about to me is I saw it on Twitter the other day. It was a screenshot, and I always forget it too, and I'm like a diehard NBA fan. That Cavs team had LeBron James, Jay Crowder, Dwayne Wade, and Derrick Rose. Like there's a picture of like all of them in a huddle together, and it's just like, oh shit, like that team like had all those players at one point. And obviously they ended up blowing it up at the deadline and got Jordan Clarkson and some other pieces, Rodney Hood. But I don't know. Jay Crowder's just that guy where like you see like a throwback picture of him in like a certain jersey, and it's like, oh yeah, Jay Crowder played on that team. Like
Yeah,
he's just
yeah.
that one like traveling NBA guy, but everywhere he goes, like he does what he needs to do for sure.
Yep. No, absolutely. Last guy here we're going to talk about,
Don't do it.
the man, H2 Jizzle, Harry Giles.
Harry, come
Listen,
back.
listen. At the end of the day, we're Sacramento Kings fans, right? Like we live in Sacramento, and I have absolutely no shame in Homer topics. Okay, but I do genuinely believe that Harry Giles is one of those guys that, because he's from Sacramento, because he played on a an admittedly terrible team, he's not really looked at as like a potential backup big man, or even a potential like six man on a team where he plays the 4 and the 5 at times. And I think that most of this is just like my desire to see him succeed. Because like you see flashes. I mean, honestly, guys, like if you don't know who we're talking about, or like if you're like, oh, that's just that guy from Sacramento, just YouTube Harry Giles top 10 passes. I mean, like, just in the past couple of years, he's made some passes that make you think like, okay, in his career, he could be one of the better big men,
Like
passing big men in the
Jokic.
league. Yes, absolutely. And I mean, he's got the mind for it. And yeah, I had to throw him on the list because at the end of the day, I just have absolutely nothing but love for this guy. And, constantly crossing my fingers that injuries, don't come back to bite him again. He made it through the whole year, I think. And just as Kings fan, I think we can't do anything besides wish him the absolute best.
Yeah, definitely. And Harry Giles is a really good segue kind of into the next segment. So if you guys don't know, Vlade Divac had the chance to pick up Harry Giles' option, and he elected not to do it, allegedly to give him motivation, right? Because he showed up to training camp a little out of shape and not ready to go. So he didn't pick up his option to give him motivation. But because he didn't pick up his option, we when it's all said and done, we can't sign him back next year because some team's going to come in and offer him more than 4 million a year, and we can't match anything more than I think it's like 3.6 million. So our next segment is will the Kings be in the running again for the worst offense or off season or worst organization? So like is it going to be a team that comes in and swoops the Kings title and gives Dwayne Dedman type contract like we did last year, that Trevor Ariza contract, the Corey Joseph contract a few years ago we're still stuck with, or one of my least favorites, that Harrison Barnes contract. So I mean, starting off the list, you have the Timberwolves. The Timberwolves, there was an article that they're kind of in that win now mindset, right? Like, do you think that they would come in and just make some type of stupid move and overpay that fringe third guy type player that they think puts them over the edge, but really kind of sets them back? Like, honestly, there was rumors about them trying to trade for Buddy Hield, like a D'Angelo Russell and Buddy Hield backcourt. you're going to get 100 points scored on you just off of the other team's starting backcourt. Like, what does
Yeah.
that do for you? Like, do you think they're potentially in the running, or is there another team that you think that could upset maybe the Kings or the T-Wolves?
I mean, I don't think if it's a list of worst organizations, I don't think that we can talk about it and not have the Knicks on there, right? I mean,
True.
I, and honestly, I think that the Knicks are a worse organization than the Kings because the Kings will forever have, well, not forever, but the Kings have the excuse of being a not favorable market. And nothing against those of you who might live in Minnesota, but I don't think that any kid, you know, grows up wishing that he could play in Minnesota for the Timberwolves, right? The Knicks live like they're New York's team. I don't care what the Nets do. The Nets could win 10 NBA Finals championships. The Knicks are New York. The fact that they can't get free agents, the fact that they can't draft right, will just forever blow my mind. I mean, they definitely have probably the worst owner in the league. And I just think the last few years have proved that they are definitely top three, top two worst ran organizations in the league. There's no doubt.
Yeah, they're just that team that the Knicks are the team this offseason to trade for Westbrook. Like they go and pick up Westbrook and
Yeah.
they pick up some other overpaid kind
John Wall.
of John. Yeah, that would be a combo. Two like overpaid players that just put their salary cap like skyrocketed in the air, and then they only win like 40 games, and then they're
Yep.
stuck with that contract for years, and they have to pair it with the draft pick to get rid of it.
Yep.
Like the Knicks for sure are always in the running for like the worst of the worst.
Yeah. No,
And
they're the team that's gonna like sign Fred Van Vliet, but then advertise it as like a Bradley Beal signing. That he's
yeah,
like gonna be the greatest, he's gonna be the greatest guard in the
he's
East.
the Knicks
Like
savior.
yeah. Because and that's the thing, it's like, you know, even some of the contracts that they had this last offseason, they were smart in theory because they were all less than 3-year contracts and none of them were the max.
Yeah, they're
You
just
know,
hoping
so
for KD.
exactly. And so, like, in theory, some of the things that they do make sense. It's like, you know, man, they're just missing one thing. Like, and it's just it's year after year after year. And eventually, when do you just say, okay, you guys are just a terrible organization, and you haven't caught 10 years worth of bad breaks, you know?
Yeah, definitely. And I mean,
But
we're like three teams in, and that's already a list. The
yeah,
T-Wolves, the Kings, and the Knicks. But I mean, thinking about those franchises, there's the Wizards or the Cavs or the Suns. Like, do you think the Suns potentially try to bring in that like last second guy to get Devin Booker to just really stick it out with the Suns and try to be a winner there, but at the end of the day, not the right fit, overpaid and stuck with the contract. Like I can feel the Suns doing something like that.
yeah,
Like the Suns have that Kings DNA in them, the Kangs as we call it here in
thanks.
Sacramento. But
Right.
I know you had Cleveland on your list. I'm interested to see why they're there.
I think that until LeBron retires, Cleveland will have to be on the list of worst organizations because, you know, the way that the owner, the way that the GM, and the way that Tristan Thompson talked and pumped their chest out, we're still Eastern Conference champs until someone, you know, takes it from us.
They extended love after LeBron
I
left.
I just don't I think that they're a little overconfident as to what they accomplished versus what LeBron James accomplished. And they have everything, you know, they have to thank LeBron for everything, absolutely everything. And I just think that they're a little overconfident, a little overzealous, and yeah, I don't like the way that they treated either of LeBron's departures.
Well, yeah, Dan Gilbert wrote the letter to LeBron. It was an open letter to LeBron that was exposed to the fans, basically saying Cleveland's going to he bet on it. Cleveland's going to win a championship before you win a championship in Miami, and that did not go very well.
No,
They drafted Anthony Bennett at one point, so if that tells you how well it went, they got
yeah,
Anthony Bennett at one point.
yeah,
Um, but I mean, all these teams here like also have the potential to be fringe playoff teams, right? Like they can be fringe teams, but they could also be far away. So do you think this next list, like, are these players close to making it, or are they still super far away? So, like, we'll start off with the Suns since we just left off on them. Like, how close do you think the Suns are to potentially making the playoffs? Are they closer to making it than they are to missing it?
I think that they're closer to making it than they are to missing it. Absolutely. But I personally am of the belief that, you know, this 8-0 run through the bubble was not a fluke. I do think that they come into next season really, really like red hot, ready to prove that it wasn't a fluke. I mean, they played the Lakers twice, or they played the Clippers twice. They played one of those two teams twice. Obviously, beat them. They played the Heat. Like they played really good teams in the bubble, and night after night just proved that they have what it takes. So, I mean, if I'm the Suns, I'm looking at this list of free agents that we just listed, and I'm saying exactly, I'm answering the question that you asked earlier. What do we do not only to keep Devin Booker here, but what do we do to make ourselves a fringe team and not far from the playoffs? And I think looking at the list that we have to talk about, I think the Suns are going to be the most surprising team, to come from fringe or far and potentially find themselves in the playoffs.
Yeah, like Devin Booker is ready to take that next step.
Yeah.
Like Devin Booker, everyone knows is talented. He's a scorer, right? But there's always that next step, like from 20 to 22 to 23 a game, like Paul George was averaging over in Indiana, and then he took that next step and bumped it up to 28 a game.
Yeah.
Like I think Devin Booker is ready to take that next step next season. And obviously another year under the belt of DeAndre Ayton. Hopefully he can stay healthy next season. I think the Suns are closer to making it than they are to missing it for sure. That 8th seed is going to be a battle. But I mean, Atlanta Hawks, another one of those teams with Clint Capella and Trae Young. What's your thought process on that one?
I don't know. In making the list, we looked at everybody's records and we tried to look at last year's standings. And it's like, I think that if you asked everyday average fans where the Hawks were in terms of standings and in terms of records, people would probably put them higher than they were. And even kind of looking back on some of their games, I feel like they played so many close games. Like they played so many last second losses. I mean, they almost kind of mirror the Kings in that way, where like us as Kings fans can look back and remember, the times that we like almost beat the Thunder, and then CP3 hits a game winning shot. And I think the Hawks kind of fell into that, just unfortunate, like, man, like we just scored one more bucket and in each of these games, and our win loss is flipped, and
Yeah.
I do think the Hawks are some veteran leadership away, and no disrespect to Vince Carter whatsoever. I'm sure that he did provide some veteran leadership to Trae Young and those other players, but when I say veteran leadership, I mean someone like Hassan Whiteside, like a player who can still contribute. And maybe Hassan Whiteside's a bad example because I don't think he's going to provide very, very much positive veteran leadership. But a player like that who can still contribute to the success of your basketball team, but
Like
is
what Kent Bazemore was to us.
exactly,
Got
exactly,
it.
yeah. And I think that that's the piece that they're missing is that veteran player who can still contribute.
Yeah. And another one of those teams that's somehow linked to Buddy Hield, which once again, are you trying to get 1,000 points scored on your backcourt every night? Because that's a
Yeah,
good way to do it. Trae
yeah.
Young and Buddy Hield. So go ahead and sign them up for the worst defensive backcourt ever if that happens. But
I
they do
think
they have those young assets. They have Kevin Herter, they have DeAndre Hunter, Cam Reddish, John Collins even. I mean, there's been rumors about him being moved, but and Clint Capella. Like they have those assets, and I think that in the East, it's really easy to be a rebuilding team, and then the next season, all of a sudden, you're the 8th or the 7th seed, just because
it's
it's the lack of talent is there.
it's easy in the East to surprise yourself come the end of the season and maybe not even know that you were in the 8th seed and be like,
Yeah,
wait, we only won 28 games. How are we in the 8th seed?
yeah. Like I
uh,
spoke on it. I spoke on it last episode. I watched the Charlotte Bobcats at the time. I think win like 36 games and make the 8th seed. So
yeah.
anything's possible over there in the East.
I think that, one thing that, the Suns, I don't think have any excuses. And I think that's why they're closer to fringe than far. I think the Hawks have the excuse of being really young. And I think that this next team, the Grizzlies, has absolutely no excuses in my opinion. But what do you think?
Yeah, I've John Morant, Brandon Clark, like everyone on that team, Jaren Jackson Jr. They're young, but like they came in ready to win. Like they just got so, and I don't want to call it luck because obviously you have scouts for a reason, but they just got so lucky to draft all of those players that are kind of in like the win now scenario, like in that type
Hmm.
of mindset. Like it's not like, oh, they need to learn how to win, they need to learn how to play NBA basketball. Like they just came in ready and like they came in like ready to go. So
Yeah.
I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if the Grizzlies are maybe make a meaningful addition this offseason, like not a big free agency splash, but someone that kind of changes things for them, and they make that jump into like the 8th through 6th seed. Like I could totally see it happening. So
Yeah.
Grizzlies are that young team, but they have all the talent in the world, and another year under their belt is big.
I mean, can we mirror them to like the Nuggets of 3 years ago?
Yeah, yeah.
You know, like I feel like,
Younger,
yeah,
younger Jokic, Gary Harris, like Jamal Murray, all of them. Like they have the potential to be that in the next couple of years. And I'm not saying
yeah,
that they're going to be coming back from 3-1 leads and knocking out potential powerhouses in the Clippers, but
no,
they have talent. They have a good coach over there. Like they have the right things in motion. Their ownership has always been good. They pretty much always, with that grit and grind team, produced a playoff team. One of the years they knocked out the Spurs as I think an 8 seed. So
yeah.
the Grizzlies have a good basketball team over there, and I think they're definitely heading in the right direction. But just kind of wrapping up our thoughts on this list, we had the Blazers, the Pelicans, and the Magic, and I'm gonna let you leave off on the Pelicans because that's always an intriguing team to everyone.
Yeah, and I just want to get this out of the way right now. I do not agree with the way that Zion Williamson has just ascended to god tier basketball player. Like, cover of NBA 2K21. I mean, like, just full advertisement. From the very beginning. I think this team is a victim of like having a tattoo of the chosen one in your back before you even play an NBA game.
Yeah,
That can go one of two ways. And if the Pelicans fall on their face next year, a lot of people are going to look really stupid. I mean, this team is full of nothing but potential, but we've seen too many times where that can where you can find yourself after that. And I listen, I don't wish negative things upon anybody or any team, but I just don't think that the Pelicans are going to do as well as people think. And especially with, the coaching hire, I know that we've kind of touched on it that like, we don't think it's really good for either side. I don't know. I don't see the Pelicans just turning things around in 1 year, Lonzo figuring it out in 1 year. I don't know.
yeah. I mean, the Pelicans are just one of those on paper teams, like
Exactly.
Lonzo Ball, Brandon Ingram, Josh Hart. They had JJ Redick, Zion Williamson. Like on paper, like that's a super good team. Like they're young, but they're good. They have the talent there. And Drew Holiday, every NBA player can attest that he's one of the best defensive guards in the league. But like you said, like I don't know if they could just put it all together next year. And
Yeah.
obviously Zion has to prove that he could stay healthy. He had that slight meniscus tear, and when you're 900 pounds coming down hard on those legs, like it's hard to keep those knees healthy, man. Like I weigh like -5 pounds, and my knees are bad sometimes when I'm playing basketball. So I can only
Yeah.
imagine. Um, but yeah, man, if they could stay healthy, they're good. But that's the
Yeah.
biggest thing. Like, can they stay healthy? Can Brandon Ingram stay healthy? I know he was struggling with blood clots, and that's something that can come back. Like we saw it with Chris Bosh on the Miami Heat. He
Yeah.
struggled with it that one time, and then it ended his career. And I'm not saying that's going to happen or that I want it to happen, but it's always a possibility. But
Yeah.
Pelicans could be there, or they could not be. Like they're right in the middle for me. And I know it's fringe or far, but it's just like kind of that limbo of like we just don't know. I just don't know
Yeah.
with that team. I don't have a good pulse on them, and we'll
I
see
think
what type.
they're Sorry, I think they're the only team on the list that could be an extreme either way. Like the
Yeah,
Pelicans could be that West team, like the Thunder were this year, and they could just randomly find themselves in the sixth seed.
yeah.
Like they could literally be that, or they could find themselves back at the bottom of the West again.
Yeah, definitely. I could for sure see that. So Pelicans, a lot rides on what to do with Drew Holiday this offseason, but we'll see what happens with them. We're going to take a quick break, and we will come right back.
Hello, everyone. Wanted to take a quick break from the podcast, talk to you guys about something really important to both Colin and myself. Before we can jump into the holiday season, we have a responsibility that all Americans must capitalize on. This election is here. You can actually already send in your ballot. The day of the general election is November 3rd, and it might be easy to just see this as a presidential election, but it is so much more than that. Voting does not make us either liberal or conservative. It makes us citizens of a democracy, and it is our responsibility to affect change in our country. If you are like me, though, you might be having a hard time trying to figure out what you'll be voting on beyond the president. With so many measures on the ballot, commercials and bias in our world cause it to be nearly impossible to get the facts straight. This is why I will be using howto.vote and ballotready.org as nonpartisan guides to my entire ballot. You can use these sites to compare candidates for president, House of Representatives, and even your state and local candidates. Even more than candidate research, both sites allow you to get details on all of the measures, both nationally and locally. 30% of voters take the time to vote and then leave parts of their ballots blank. Don't let that be you. This is a missed opportunity to choose the leaders for our communities and make positive change through voting. For anyone who is voting by mail, by the way, make sure you sign your ballot in order for it to be official and count towards the election. Democracy works when we all vote, but misinformation and confusion about election procedures have resulted in lower voter turnout year after year. So make sure to check your registration status today, and when you confirm you're registered, decide when and where you will vote, or find the deadline for your mail-in ballot. If you're voting in person, find your polling site and make sure that you have the appropriate ID. We can all affect change, and this is how. Don't be the person who doesn't vote and then spends all day on Facebook complaining about politics. Go vote. Back to the pod.
Alrighty, welcome back, guys. So our last topic was fringe or far, right? And those are those situations where you're kind of not sure what's happening. But this next one are the guarantees for next year. The ones that everyone knows is going to happen. Kind of like everyone knew for the last, 4 or 5 years that it was going to be Warriors Cavs. That was always a guarantee. Every single year is a guarantee. So what are the 6 teams for the finals this year, in your opinion, that are guaranteed?
I mean, I think that, we're going to say the first team is the Warriors.
Yeah.
And I want everybody to stop thinking that that's not true. Like,
Yeah.
all they lost was Kevin Durant, and they gained Andrew Wiggins, which I think Wiggins is still maybe slightly underrated or underappreciated for what he can be when now he's the third or fourth option.
That is
So
a good team for Andrew Wiggins to be on to kind of because his lack of success has been, allegedly at least, his determination, right?
yeah,
And under Steve Kerr, under a winning organization, like that's a great place for him to be. And I'm
yeah,
not saying they're going to keep him because I think ultimately they got him for the contract so they can move him. But the Warriors, man, like everyone forgot about him last year. I'm not going to lie, I forgot about them.
yeah.
But
And
yeah,
I mean that's a good point. So the caveat of all of this is that we're saying that how the teams are structured right now, minus small little tweaks. So like the Bucks, for example, third year in a row now, the Bucks are a lock for finals favorites. They have to be, because when you make the number one seed twice, you get 60 wins one of those seasons. You absolutely have to be a lock. Now, they do a crazy thing and move on from Giannis, they're immediately moved off of the list. But I think for right now, I mean, Colin, is there anything you can think of to where, on paper, how they perform during the regular season, why the Bucks shouldn't be on this list? I know I mentioned potentially not putting them on there because like this is third year in a row now that they're going to be on
yeah.
this list, and are they going to disappoint us again?
I mean, with the Bucks, I don't think it matters. When you have, as you said, the on paper term, when you have on paper the best player in the NBA on your team, like you have to be a lock for the finals every year. Like LeBron in his first stint in Cleveland from about 2007 to that 2010 range before he left to the Heat, the Cavs were basically a lock for the finals every year in terms of like predictions.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, they ran into that Celtics team. They got knocked out by that Magic team, which I would kind of compare the Bucks to the Heat this year. Is like that was the Cavs magic moment for Giannis. And ultimately, LeBron chose to leave in that moment, and Giannis is staying. So because Giannis is staying, you can't count them out of the finals. You just can't.
Yeah, no, exactly. And speaking of LeBron, you can almost never count out, a repeat. You can never count on previous year's champion. We tried to count the Raptors out, and they almost caught us red-handed. That we shouldn't be doing that. But the Lakers have to be on this list. Not much to really say on the Lakers. I feel like we've touched on them because they continued to be the topic of conversation right up to the end. No reason why the Lakers shouldn't be on this list. But a team that probably raises some questions in the Clippers. Do they? Is it a hot take to ask a question? Do they deserve to be on this list?
If you have Kawhi, and I know Pandemic P is suspect at this point. He's the imposter if we're comparing him to Among Us. But if you have Paul George and you have Lou Will and you have Kawhi Leonard, like I just can't right-mindedly say that they're not going to make the finals. And that's a lot of talent to throw in all at once and push them in and say, go make the finals. Like that's a lot of big heads. That's a lot of egos. That's a lot of people used to being the 1A, 1B situation on their teams. So I wasn't super surprised this year when they got knocked out. I was surprised that it was the Nuggets that knocked them out. I was surprised that they had a 3-1 lead and they got knocked out. But I think that this year that they get better.
Mm-hmm.
I think Paul George has a bounce back year, and that's probably the hot take in itself is Paul George having a bounce back better year. He's only
Yeah.
30. That's not old in basketball years. Like
That's the tail end of your peak prime is I think
yeah,
30, 31. Yeah, absolutely.
yeah, definitely. But the Clippers I think are pretty much a guarantee to potentially make the finals this upcoming year for sure.
Yeah. And so, I mean, similar to the Clippers and what you said about, all this talent and just throwing it into seeing if it works, that's kind of what the Nets did, like with with KD and Kyrie. They're like, okay, two top, three players in their position. Let's see if this sticks.
Yeah, the Nets are almost like I don't know, like Frankenstein. Like you're just sewing all these body parts together, and you're like, I hope this works. Like KD and Kyrie Irving, possibly like the most opinionated head cases in the NBA, and that's taking nothing away from what Kyrie Irving's done for his community, and I know he's a big person in that sense, but in a locker room, like those two people like together, it's just hard to imagine. And I know that they say they're friends, but they string together 6 losses. They're under 500. Like, what does that locker room look like with KD and Kyrie Irving?
Yeah.
But I mean, on paper, coming off an Achilles injury, I think KD is still a top 10 player. I think that he has stuff that you just can't teach. Like that
Yeah.
Achilles injury doesn't take away that smooth jump shot.
Yep.
But that Nets team, I just feel like you can't count them out next year. And that's another one of those Warriors-esque teams that like people forgot about.
Yeah.
Like they're here next year and they still have like some good role players around them and they have assets to move. Like they can move Karis LeVert. They have draft picks to move. They have Jared Allen to move. Like they're not done yet and they're still a finals lock for next year essentially. Yeah, and I mean to finish out this list, we have the Celtics and the Heat, the rematch of the Eastern Conference Finals. Those two teams obviously can't count them out. They were both one game away from making the finals. Celtics are just getting better with that youth with Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, and Kemba Walker's always going to be cardiac Kemba. They have Gordon Hayward's contract to move, the 14th pick in the draft. Like the Celtics could potentially get better this offseason too. And this is the first time in a while where we're seeing the East with like multiple contenders over there. Like for
Yeah.
the longest time, it was like the Cavs and I don't know, maybe the Raptors. Like I don't know, maybe this team. Like there's some teams over there that can win and play some really really good basketball.
Yeah.
And I mean, with the Heat, they're literally coming off a finals appearance.
Yeah.
Like they were just there. Like how do you count them out?
Yep. Absolutely. All right. At the end of the day, we've seen it time and time again. There's no such thing as a lock. Nobody had the Heat as a lock for the finals moving forward. That's for sure. As we kind of move into our hot take, we're going to be talking about one guy who cannot be denied that he is a lock for future multiple MVPs. So yeah, let's jump into our hot take.
Ah, my hand, that's hot.
This one's hot too.
Okay, we're trapped, everyone for himself.
Alrighty, so our hot take today: can Kristaps Porzingis be Luka's second option on a championship team? Right off the bat, we have to think about the NBA in duos at this point. When you look around the NBA, you see duos everywhere. And, if we're pulling out a team that might not have a duo, the duo for the Heat was pretty much Jimmy Butler and his supporting cast. That was the duo for the Heat. But, LeBron, AD, Steph, and Clay, and half the time Draymond, and, PG and Kawhi. And the Mavericks have this duo that, like if you take the current Luka and you take the KP from 2 years ago, the Kristaps from 2 years ago, you're like, how do these guys not make the finals? But we see kind of what injuries have done to Kristaps. There's room for maybe a most improved player of the year award if he really just takes off. But what do you think? I mean, can he really still be that guy? And can he be a second option to a player like Luka on a championship team?
Yeah, with Kristaps Porzingis being what he is so far, like I feel like I can trust him as far as I could throw him, and he's 7'3", so I can't throw him very far. But ACL tear, meniscus tear, how do you trust that with a 7'3" person? Like you just locked him into a multi-year contract, and he has like all the assets and skills to be an all NBA player for the rest of his career, but I just don't think that he can string together healthy years.
Yeah.
So I think the Mavericks need someone else.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree.
And it might be too soon to say, and that's why it's a hot take.
And look, I mean, this is definitely going to be a hot take, and it's going to be one of my potential for not great hot takes. But we honestly don't know what Luka's prime looks like. We don't know if he, Devin Booker scored, what was it, like 70 points. Great, but he hasn't led the Suns to really anything, and I mean, Russell Westbrook averaged a triple-double, but didn't take his team to anything. So are we even sure, that Luka is like that guy who's going to carry his team all the way through to a finals, regardless of who's with him? So like, are we seeing a LeBron James who can carry his team regardless of who's surrounding him? Or are we seeing somebody who's going to require that second superstar?
We're seeing LeBron James. Like, there's no doubt about it. Like, he makes everyone around him better, and he always makes the right choice. Like, the difference between comparing him to LeBron and like Westbrook is like Westbrook was one track minded and he just did whatever was good for him. And that's why the team didn't succeed, and it's kind of similar to Booker. But with LeBron, like he makes the right choice to set his team up for success. And I think Luka is like the same type of player. Like, yeah, he's going to get his 30 points, his 28 points, his double-digit rebounds and assists, but like those aren't stat paddings. Like those are him making the right basketball move. And like that's something you can't really teach. And I think that the Mavericks just have like a gem in him. Yeah. But that being said, I don't think that Kristaps Porzingis is like the right fit next to him long term. And it was definitely like a good choice to try to get him. Because like if you definitely gamble and you win that gamble, like that's multiple championships.
Yep.
But it's just scary seeing the meniscus tear, and I'm pretty sure it was non-contact, which it usually is. But like, I don't know, knee injuries with anyone are scary. But 7'3", skin and bones, like a center, especially like a defensive center with him, like it's just terrifying.
Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah, and I mean, I think Luka is the absolute, brightest shining star, that the NBA has in the next 10 years. I mean, there's no question. But, I think the NBA is in a different world than where it was when LeBron was taking on the Warriors by himself. Like we just said, both conferences are absolutely loaded with teams, that are competing for a championship every single year. And the Mavs kind of oddly find themselves in this period of the Western Conference, where the Nuggets are coming up as championship contenders. The Warriors are back. The Suns go 8-0 in the bubble. The Clippers go sign 2 all-time talents. And the Mavericks are just kind of passing through this time where, don't forget, Luka's still on his rookie contract. So who knows?
Yeah. I mean, to wrap things up, I just think with Kristaps, like he's that guy that you look at in 8 years and you look at his basketball reference and you just see a string of years where it's like 29 games played, 18 games played, 55 games played, 19 games played. Like, I just think that his career is kind of heading towards that type of, like, I don't know. I feel badly saying it because everyone knows that I'm psychic, so I might be wishing it upon him. But I don't know. I just think they're one piece away for sure.
All right, guys. So that's going to do it for us. Once again, just want to absolutely thank, the Unhinged Sports Podcast Network. It's very, very cool. We're just a few months in here, and we're just 2 guys who love talking about basketball, and pretty exciting to already kind of be a part of a sports network and see how we both grow together. So make sure to follow us on Instagram, follow us on Twitter at The Reserves Podcast. If you're not already, subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you're watching this on YouTube, make sure to hit that like button, comment down below, maybe on some of the things that you want us to talk about. We've got all kinds of off-season, jam-packed information for you guys. If the NBA does one thing better than any other major sport, it is that its off-season is full of drama and excitement. So plenty of content to come from us. Before we get out of here, you have anything else wrong, Colin?
Nope. I think we're done.
Alrighty. See you guys later.
See ya.